And if you use a punch like this, it prevents the detent ball from flying right up through the top hole and out where you cannot find it. So here's the shift fork, second and third. And this is a very important point here. Make sure you make a mental note of this. Between that shift fork and this casting here, which is the front side of the shift cover facing forward, facing the engine, there's one washer between the shift fork and this casting. Make sure that you have one washer there. It is very important because I will explain here in just a second after I get this shift rail out. There we go. Now you can see this little hole in this shift rail. This hole holds a little pin here, and the pin usually sits inside. Now the reason this little washer is important, when you move the detent, these two grooves here are called the detent grooves. This one is the second gear and this one is the third gear detent. This groove over here is to hold it in neutral position. When you move the detents, you're moving these grooves further away from the neutral, the middle position. And this little pin is crucial. It acts as part of the lockout system to make sure that you cannot shift the transmission into more than one gear at a time. Don't ask me how they engineered that. They found a way to make sure you could only put it in one gear at a time, and that is part of the system. Now, the reason this washer is important, when you move these detents, the space that you travel, the travel of the shift rail increases, I should say. And perhaps if you move it too much, it could increase so that this hole in the shift rail, where that, no, I just lost that pin, where the pin sits in, could pop out of this housing. Let's see if we can get better light here. Now, this washer prevents the shift rail from moving too far with your shift fork sitting against it. You do not want to move this shift rail too far, otherwise that pin will come out of this hole in the housing here and fall out of place either way. So when it goes back and forth, it's supposed to limit the movement so that pin stays inside this housing. Anyway, just take my word for it. If I confused you, make sure one washer is right next to this cast block there. So this is the original factory shift rail for second and third gear. Now that we've determined the gears are good enough to move the detents and the space is there between the gears so that you can move the detents, after you pull your second and third shift rail out, the first thing to do is take a welder. If you don't have access to a welder, take it to a friend or take it to a machine shop. But the point is you need to weld and fill in these two shift grooves. I say two because on this tractor I am moving second and third gear detents. Some tractors, maybe you only want to do one detent. Third gear and second gear, fill them in with weld so that they look like this section of the shaft. Now this middle flat area is not too important. Don't go out of your way to make sure it's filled in with weld, but if you're welding it yourself, make sure you fill in these two grooves. After you weld, your shift rail should look like this. This is another shift rail that I prepared for this video ahead of time. Your detent groove for neutral and your little hole for the lockout pin. You can see that these two second and third gear detent grooves are filled in. And like I said, the middle, the flat area, is not too important. So after that shift rail grooves are welded in, we need to install this shift rail back into the shift cover. So the next step, we need to determine how far to move our detents so that we can machine or grind the new grooves for the detent ball in the correct place. So we are going to install this shift rail back into the shift cover. And now the method I use to deal with these detent balls, this side again is the front facing the engine. This detent ball controls the neutral detent. This side controls the detent when you are in the gear. We're just going to leave that little pin out right now. All it does is just complicate things. So, big, large Phillips head screwdriver. Use the groove in the Phillips head to force the detent ball down into the groove. And I think I have it oriented right. Yep. So, if we force that down and press in the shaft at the same time, like so, we will be able to slide it in. Your one washer goes on. Now your second, third shift fork goes on. And we can slide that shift rail further in. And, oh yeah, we will continue to go in here. Now we've got to the other ball. Again, press down, force that detent ball down into its pocket, Phillips head screwdriver, and then we're going to pound this shift rail through. Now, I actually put the shift rail in upside down. I would advise you to do the same, because the process that we're doing is determining how far to move that groove for the second and third gears. And the area that we just welded up, it's a little softer metal. The weld metal material is softer than the surface hardened stock factory shift rail. So that little detent ball is going to mark on this welded area when we shift it in and out of second and third gear. So it's important to put this shift rail in upside down. 180 degrees or 90 degrees would even work. That way you're not giving a false mark with the ball on your welded area of the shift rail. So once it's all the way in, you can flip it back to the orientation it's supposed to be in. Right there, 180 degrees. And be sure to put your little set screw to hold the shift fork to the shift rail. And tighten it down.